My name is Marcus Foth. I welcome everyone to this next session of the City by City Festival, Connecting Cities, Empowering Communities. This session is brought to you by Australia, and we have a range of fantastic panelists here. Myself, I'm from QUT. I'll give you some more information in a second. And we also have in our Zoom room, Monique Mann, senior lecturer at Deakin University in criminology and a member of the Alfred Deakin Institute for Citizenship and Globalization. And we have Zoe Eather, host and the CEO of My Smart Community, as well as board member and secretary of the Australian Smart Communities Association, and James Peet, the Chief Digital Officer of the Moreton Bay Regional Council. We are also still expecting Maree Adshead, a Queensland Small Business Commissioner, to join us. So if that's the case and you see another person join our room, that'll be Maree. So this session is called Empowering Communities in Australia with Data to Make Our Cities and Regions Better. And since we are hosting this from Australia, I'd also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land where we are all variously placed right now, and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. If I were to be in Brisbane, it would be the Yagara and the Turrbal people, but I just looked up here in St. Helens in Tasmania, it's the Kunara Kuna tribe. And perhaps those joining us from other places would like to mention the traditional owners respectively. So the session is structured in the way that I'm going to give a brief overview of a particular project that we've been working with Maree and with Monique recently, and a couple of other partners. And that's going to set the scene on a bit of a discussion that we'll have around data and what it means for communities, as well as how we can have some more participatory approaches to data analytics. So for that, I'll share my screen. I'll just run through a couple of slides to illustrate what we are talking about here. All right, I'm just going to check with my panelists. Is that coming up?
Yep.
Great. So my role at QUT is predominantly research. I've been working in that area of urban informatics for quite a while now. We've founded the Urban Informatics Research Lab in 2006. And this research group at QUT is looking at all the kind of interconnections and relationships between people, place, and technology. So we started quite early when the smart city hype, I think, hadn't really taken off. You can see that 2006 was early days. We were in good company with the Sensible City Lab at MIT and a couple of other early adopters of the real-time city kind of research trajectory. And then around 2010, 11, especially driven by a lot of interest around big data analytics as well as city analytics, this kind of research era really took off, and there's a bunch of new research centers that started and that have emerged since then. So our approach at QUT is a little bit broad and interdisciplinary. We're not just focusing on data analytics, but we have a team that is based on, as I mentioned, this triad of people, place, technology. So there is colleagues and PhD candidates coming from an urban or spatial background. Then we have a bunch of researchers from a sociology, humanities, social science background, as well as a technical background, computer science, human-computer interaction, and design areas. And so we try and position our work really across this quite interdisciplinary sphere of urban informatics. So the latest project that will be a bit of a point of for our discussion, a focus for our discussion, really started with this image, which shows the IBM Control Room that was, I think, already installed back in 2012 in Rio de Janeiro. And since then, these types of urban control centers have been installed and deployed all across the world. They probably are getting also more advanced. What is interesting around this is that this also represents a bit of a tangible kind of, photo or image of what we mean by the smart city. So a lot of the time when the smart city is covered in the media and the press, people are thinking, well, what kind of photo do we use to illustrate what we are talking about? And these kinds of images often come up. So it's a bunch of data streams that are coming together. You can see these analysts sitting in front of terminals, taking care of us, taking care of the city, looking after traffic, mobility, waste streams, and so forth. So it's quite an important role of optimizing these kinds of city services and management kinds of functions. What we thought for a while now is really the kind of challenge and the kind of endeavor of trying to bring the power and the capabilities of this type of city analytics to ordinary people, to grassroots communities, to you and me. So how can we have the power of what's going on in this room pretty much in everyone's pocket? And so we ran a little experiment, a bit of a concept that is inspired by this particular installation at our campus at QUT. This is a large visualization space that we call the Cube. And you can see that this is a little bit different. Whilst we also have quite some large screen real estate, you see multiple people assembled there. There is touch screens at the bottom row that can be operated by people to then manipulate the data or the application that runs on this large screen. And it's open and accessible, not the kind of idea of a control center that is tucked away in a secret location. So we, in a way, wanted to turn this notion of a smart city control center inside out, to make it open and accessible. So very much in line with the values and the principles of the open and agile smart cities network, being open and being accessible. For that, we ran a bit of a proof of concept, a bit of an experiment. We focused specifically on food trucks in Brisbane in Australia. And so these kinds of sole operators are going out into the city, and they obviously trying to find the best locations. So what we've naughtily done is we've taken some of our equipment from QUT and pushed it across the river to the location, the kind of commercial kitchen where these food truckies come together each afternoon to prepare their food, and then they load it up into their truck and they go out into the city to sell their goods. And our objective was to simplify the access to data, but also the way of deriving insights. So rather than saying, here's a whole bunch of open data, knock yourselves out, here's our repository, we in a way wanted to turn this supply-driven approach to data to a demand-driven approach, where we actually engaged with them and said, what's important to you? And the data isn't really important to them at all. What's important to them is selling food. And so one of the types of applications is actually quite simple. We wanted to ensure that as they go out into the city, they are able to position themselves so that they don't create internal competition. So this is a very simple application that is shared across a spatial mashup. And you can see the different cuisines, the different flavors for that evening positioned across Brisbane. Another thing that we've done is a mashup that's based on crowding data. So we were interested in identifying where people would congregate at a certain time, and then trying to correlate this strategically with the positioning and the dispatchment, if you'd like, of these food truckies. So we looked at construction sites in Brisbane, we looked at music and sports events. We've also looked at postgraduate students. Often they have after-hour classes, and oftentimes the only food options on campus that are left open would be, vending machines or the microwaves. And so we've also looked at sending food trucks to those locations where postgrad students would leave lectures after hours, and then people have food available. So it's actually, if you think about it, a very simple way of breaking down the needs of small businesses with data analytics. But if you think of the variety, and I'm going to ask Maree later on to give us a bit of a summary of the diversity of small businesses operating, the needs and the demand for data analytics of this type would be quite phenomenal. So this is how the Data Care project was born. It is based on the principle of making city analytics capabilities more accessible and more participatory. And in turn, what we are hoping to do, and this is part of the research, we are wanting to find out whether this value-led approach to access or accessibility and participation, whether that will renew the social license to operate smart cities. So a lot of the kind of backlash that we've seen over the last probably 2 or 3 years with regards to the very commercial push for smart city investments and deployment, we are interested in whether this will do will contribute to a renewal of the social license to operate smart cities. This is taken from our website, datacare.urbaninformatics.net. We've been thinking of data care as a dedicated space, an actual facility that is hosted by the city, kind of like a living lab. And that living lab can be configured in different ways. I'll briefly mention the first two because they are quite straightforward. So the configuration around data awareness is really the base configuration where people can access the data care facility to get assistance and advice on their data needs, whether it is individual or commercial or their community needs. It then goes into the next configuration, which is around the workshop or the classroom around data literacy training. And I think the more interesting ones are the data action and the data futures configuration. Data action is a configuration of the space that is allowing community groups or small businesses to actually lease the space for a dedicated session where they are kind of similar to what we've done with the food trucks. They're actually taken by the hand by those that understand data visualization. They also are paired up with experts around data science in order to then do a workshop and do the kinds of inquiries that are based on their domain. So depending on what kind of business they're operating or what kind of community group we are dealing. And finally, the data futures one is actually of interest and design for the city itself. So the city would be oftentimes approached around new smart city investments, new technologies are coming up all the time. And the question really is, what kinds of policy implications would that bring about? So if you think about, say, smart street lights, you might want to identify the entire spectrum from utopian outcomes. Everything is hunky-dory. Everything goes the way that the vendor would probably describe it, all the way to dystopian outcomes on the other side of the spectrum, where you might run into problems, as what we've seen and we've read about in the news in Hong Kong, backlash in other cities of the world. We've been also researching the example of the Sidewalk Labs project in Toronto, and Monique might like to exemplify and illustrate this a bit further. So the data futures one is using speculative design scenarios to anticipate these kinds of situations so that the city can react and accompany the smart city investment with the appropriate policy formulations and policy developments. So those are kind of the 4 usage scenarios that we've started with. And we are currently hoping to win some funding from the Australian Research Council with these partners. This is a project that is led by QUT and Deakin University. And we managed to get quite a bit of interest and support from SUEZ, Brisbane City Council. They are in turn a Open and Agile Smart Cities member. Frontier SI, the Consumer Policy Research Centre, the Smart Cities Council, Australia, New Zealand, the Committee for Brisbane. The Queensland government is represented both through Maree as the Queensland Small Business Commissioner, as well as through the Queensland Privacy Commissioner, and Oren, which is the Australian Urban Research Infrastructure Network. So we managed to get quite a diverse and quite strong consortium of research partners to support this project. If anyone is interested in reading about the data care project beyond our panel session, we've written up a chapter that is available on this side where you can read more details about the data care vision and the project proposal itself. With this, I'll start our discussion. I'm just going to stop my slides here. And I might start with James, and I'm interested in your reactions, James, but also how do you see the role of the city? Moreton Bay Regional Council is also a member of the Open and Agile Smart Cities Network. So the role of the city in creating a data ecosystem, and perhaps whether you have some of your own examples and your own experience to share as the Chief Digital Officer of Moreton Bay Council.
Yeah, thanks, Marcus. Yeah, I'd like to actually acknowledge and pay my respects to the Kabi Kabi, Jinnabara and Turrbal people. They're the traditional owners of the land that Moreton Bay Regional Council is on. And the council itself, just for those who aren't familiar, we're directly north of the Brisbane City Council area. We're Australia's third largest council, got about just a little bit under 500,000 population, and about 2,000 square kilometres is our area. So, and my role within the council is really to work horizontally across the business to help the different departments to, I guess, become a lot more aware of the digital opportunities that exist. In terms of that question, so the role of the city in creating a data ecosystem, we've been, I guess, heavily involved probably in the last 5 years, but it's certainly starting to accelerate in this area. But to get data, you need sensors and devices and things like that that generate the data. So it really starts with the deployment of those kinds of devices, but they need to provide a benefit to the community. Now, that could be a direct benefit. So it could be one of our projects is a road defect detection system that uses AI and camera footage to automatically pick up potholes and things like that in the roads. Or it could be an indirect benefit, something like something that causes the council to operate more efficiently. That can be more of an indirect benefit, reducing the costs to the community. But once we've got the devices, obviously they're now creating data, but the data itself is actually of no benefit. What we really need to do now is work with our teams to really understand how this data can be used to transform how they deliver their services or manage their assets. And we're also seeking over the next year or so, we'll start to speak a lot more with the community to understand what they think about that too. One of the key aspects, and you mentioned it, Marcus, it was around the social license. The last thing we want when we speak to the community is for them to accuse us of being Big Brother. And we're really interested in different approaches that we can take to not only seek feedback from the community, but also educate the community in a respectful way, so that there can be like a shift in the dial of people's understanding about all of this. So that's that side of things is how can we use it. But I guess I've really been speaking in the context of an individual council. So I see a data ecosystem probably in two ways then. First way, in no particular order, is it relates to the different parts of the council organisation, or data that supports different parts of the council. So whether it be bin data versus climate data. Or it could be a data set for the same thing, but across many councils. And so there's the two different sort of ideas with that. And I think in both cases, data standards and consistency is imperative in making the data easy to be used. And your example, Marcus, where you're not only just providing them with a raw data set, but actually starting to give people opportunity to see it applied is a really important part of that too. In terms of examples, a data set within a single council, and I'm really interested in not just the direct benefit of data, say a smart lighting infrastructure or other sensors. But I'm interested in those secondary benefits. When we bring those things together, how can they be used? One example for us is we've got a smart lighting network along a shared pathway. We're also running object detection in our CCTV cameras along there as well. So we can pick up a speeding vehicle. Not that there should be speeding vehicles along a footpath, but you do get them sometimes. And we're looking at ways to bring in that sensor data and then say, make the smart lights flash. But the smart lights to flash need to do it quickly. So if the data that supports that network isn't appropriate for the use, then what's the use of it? So that's a key thing. Another one is, Brisbane, Moreton Bay, and there's 9 other councils in southeast Queensland, and we have a population of 3.6 million people. So we're looking at opportunities across different councils to fit the region out with climate sensors, so we can increase the granularity of climate sensing and things like that. But again, if we don't have the data in a harmonious format, then we're really causing ourselves trouble. So that's sort of, I think, that some of the key aspects are our role.
Great, thank you, James. I got a couple of follow-up questions, but I'm going to bring Monique into the conversation first, and then later open it up for discussion. Monique and I are colleagues and working across QUT and Deakin. Monique, I'm interested in the research at the Toronto case with the Sidewalk Labs example specifically, and the theoretical kind of analysis around technological sovereignty and privacy in smart cities, which is also been your focus and your area of expertise. How can we make sure that we empower citizens and communities with data, but at the same time we want to prevent that the data is used against them? Have you got some thoughts on that?
Excellent. Thank you, Marcus. I do. But I would first also like to acknowledge and pay my respects to the traditional owners of the land, air and sea in which I live and work, the Walluwarong people of the Kulin Nations. And in terms of your question, Marcus and I recently published this research, and you'll be able to find it open access online via the QUT institutional repository if you'd like to read it. But we looked at contrasting various case studies or examples of smart city developments. We focused initially on the Sidewalk Labs development in Toronto, which was advanced by a Google affiliate, and really their attempts to develop the Toronto waterfront or the quayside into a corporatized, corporate-led smart city with little, if any, social license.
In Queensland. Across the country, there's about 2 million. And by definition, that's businesses that employ up to 20 full-time staff. And the majority of those 445,000 or 2 million across the country are either sole operators or up to 5 staff. So we're talking 90-ish% of those numbers are in that very small scale. And so their situation is almost the same as individuals, and the diversity that you alluded to before, Marcus, is into every possible sector of the economy. They're a very difficult cohort to wrangle, and that is a little bit like the experience we certainly had with the Open Data Institute as well, because we had all sectors of the economy collaborating or seeking to work together there. So it's certainly not an easy space to be in a bridge type, in a connector role, which is what was not dissimilar to what I saw the Open Data Institute as. So the Small Business Commission was established in Queensland as a COVID response. We're part of the enabling small business to deal with and address predominantly disputes around rent reductions and the ability that so a lot of businesses obviously had reduction in turnover because they couldn't trade and they had to close. That's really what we were set up to do. But what emerged throughout the last 9 months of dealing with that was this real need that small business had to have a bridge and a connector, not only into other business, but really importantly into our 3 layers of government that we have here in Australia. And I think that's been really interesting to watch this data care project evolve, because I can see the key thing for small business, and this hasn't changed in the 6 years or even longer perhaps that we've known each other, is and been on each other's radar, is small business need to be awakened more as to the possibility, what's possible with data. And you gave a really good example with the food trucks there. It's that inspiration piece that I think is really exciting. But not only do business need to be shown what's possible and understand what data can do for them, but how. And that's the really important piece of the puzzle that I'm very excited about with data care, because not only is it about showing business what insights and knowledge can be unlocked, but it's about showing them really practically how to take advantage of that. So a couple of things that I think really align nicely with the work that we do with small business is being that bridge and continuing to be that bridge between government, the custodians of a lot of data, and business and the participants in the data sphere. But also too, I just wanted to mention one of the things that we're doing here is called the Small Business Friendly Councils Initiative, and that is about enabling local councils, cities, to help build and foster a really vibrant small business community. And one of the great things that can be done as part of that they naturally have at their disposal is data. So I think that's something that I'm really keen to see unfold as well. And in our role as a bridge and a connector, to be able to bring small business and their cities to the table around a data conversation and be able to enliven them to that. Because, you know, as we've always said, data is just data unless you find it and do something with it and actually extract that knowledge and that information. So, yes, that's really it from me at this point, Marcus.
Right, thank you, Maree. And finally, I'd like to bring Zoe into the discussion as well. Zoe is a bit of a powerhouse when it comes to smart cities and smart communities, I'd say. Not only does Zoe host the My Smart Community podcast, but it's actually evolved, I would say, into a bit of a clearinghouse of knowledge and experience and case studies, and Zoe knows who's who in the zoo when it comes to smart communities and smart cities. And there's the kinds of the 3 values or aspirations around accessible smart cities, livable smart cities, and sustainable smart cities. So I'm specifically interested, Zoe, in your kind of unpacking of the first one, the how to make them accessible, which kind of corresponds to our notion of participatory for communities. So what do you think is critical for this translation of the smart cities that we see these days to a more accessible and participatory notion that benefits citizens and communities?
Thanks so much, Marcus. And yes, I'd like to first acknowledge the Guyabal people. I am in Toowoomba, and I love living in regional Australia, and really acknowledge the land that I'm on today. Thanks so much for having me. It's so exciting to be here, and shaking out the cobwebs from 2020 and being on holidays is also really exciting. Thanks so much for your question too. As you know, I talk to a lot of people, and I talk to people nearly every week about smart cities and communities. But I'll just backtrack a little bit as to why I started the podcast, because it's important to this question, I think. So in 2016, I ended up in South Korea as part of a secondment to Trade Investment Queensland when I was working for the state government. And I went over there and I was looking at, my background's in transport, I'm an engineer. I was looking at autonomous vehicles, which in 2016 was a really exciting thing. I mean, I guess it remains to be. And that's when I learned about smart cities. Now, when I first, was thinking about smart cities, it was I was actually thinking fairly boringly about traffic and how we could improve traffic flow if the traffic lights were talking to each other and to the cars. And I was getting this information and going on field trips with in South Korea, and it blew my mind how advanced they were in technology. But then I started to have a lot more conversations about people, like why are we actually doing this? What's the point of all of this? And when I came back to Australia, I had lots of conversations with anyone I could find in smart city space, and what are we doing in Australia? And Marcus was one of those people. And I was just, trying to find anyone that was talking about this stuff. But when I talked to my family or my community, no one had any idea what I was talking about. And it was even hard, even when I explained what it was, they didn't really care too much because they didn't seem like, it didn't affect them. Like what do I care if, this is connected and that's connected? So we weren't, that transition or that bridge to why is this important to the community wasn't yet built. So I really wanted to, selfishly, I wanted to talk to more people about this smart city thing, right? And I wanted to do it in a way that I could talk to anyone around the world without getting on a plane or driving anywhere. So I had a very good friend who had the skills to create a podcast. So I was speaking to her and I was like, oh, let's do this thing. And what I wanted to do was make it accessible for everybody. It's free, anyone can listen, CEOs can listen and get something out of it. My mum can listen and get something out of it. And small businesses can listen and get something out of it. And obviously, not every single episode will appeal to every single person. But the idea was to get as much knowledge out there into the world that people then can consume and go, why is this important? So that's still, I don't think has changed. We have matured, I think, in our conversations of why we're doing this, and there's more conversation about it's not about technology, it's about the people, and that's all well and good. However, it has to be, those enablers still need to be there. The technology needs to be there because it's happening whether we like it or not. And the more people we have involved in the conversation, the more we can shape the future that we actually want, rather than it be draped on us, which Monique, you were talking about as well, which I thought, very interesting. I went to Toronto when it was still happening and had some conversations, but not too many. But also with the data aspect of it, and Maree, I love what you talked about when you were talking about local councils being, I guess, that partner with the community and the small businesses, and James, you would appreciate this as well. The local council are really the coalface to the community, and we need to empower them, but they also need the skill sets required to be able to talk to the community, both in engagement, but also the visualization, of data. Well, what are we actually doing with this data? Because we're telling, small businesses, use data and let's all do this, but we're not empowering the local government to do the same thing. I think that's something that's really important. And having a bit of inside knowledge of what James is doing at Moreton Bay, it's amazing what you've been able to achieve in the short time period that you have, and then how I can see that trajectory rising as well once we can bring in the more and more skill sets that we require. One of the reasons I started the podcast was to get more people talking about this thing. So then it's networking on steroids, FYI, but also then bringing those learnings, because people talk to me and they tell me lots of things, into government. How do we bring those real things that are happening on the ground into academia and government? So it can't just be one, it's not just local council, it's not just state government, it's not just the universities. It has to really be a collaborative approach. So in how we get more people involved, there's two sides. We want the community to not be left behind. We need to speak their language. We need to not educate is the word, I suppose, but not in a they don't know what they're talking about. They do know, they have smarts, but we need to give them the tools to be able to tell us what it actually means for them. And I really liked what you said earlier, Marcus, around data. Like, people don't care about data except for data nerds like you and me. But what is important to them. So you're not even, you're not having a data workshop, because people aren't going to show up to that unless they're data nerds. And actually, you don't need their opinion because they'll tell you anyway. You want a workshop that's like, what's important to, food truck 101, or, come tell us, free beer, whatever, pizzas. But I think that's really important. It's like really thinking about who we're targeting in a certain aspect, because we can't do the same thing for every group. And sometimes I think we try and do that. And some of the things are really super low tech, phone calls, focus groups, all those type of things as well. And I just want to bring up quickly, that digital divide aspect is so important. We started highlighting it in COVID because it was a human rights issue. Essentially, you couldn't get the information you needed if you didn't have a device that you could use and a strong internet connection. And so I think we need to really leverage that conversation that started during or continues during COVID, and then work out what we're going to do about it, because it is a smart community project. It's not going to be super high tech. It's probably going to be pretty low tech to start with, getting people connected. But then all those other things that your program that you're talking about, Marcus, the data care has, data literacy and all those type of things as well. So I don't know if I answered your question, but that's my thoughts on the matter.
That's fantastic. Thank you, Zoe. So in the remaining time, I've got a couple of follow-up questions where we might enter into a bit of a discussion. The first one is for both James and Maree, because from both what Monique and I have kind of experienced in our pilot project, but also from your responses, it seems there's perhaps a bit of a naive perspective in academia where we think that businesses will all just be one happy family, and actually, especially small businesses, a cutthroat kind of situation where they really need to bring in the turnover in order to still survive and to still be, operating the next week, the next month. And so the question I have is with regards to the city's remit to provide infrastructure, in our case, data infrastructures for everyone. But then in the perspective of small businesses, it's actually about competition and being able to secure, for instance, certain data insights to have a unique or advantage over your competitors. I'm interested to hear your thoughts. If we had such a facility such as data care, how would we navigate this kind of conundrum between the commons and the city providing infrastructure for everyone, and then businesses obviously operating in a competitive environment in a market economy? Do you have some thoughts on that?
I've got a couple. Look, I think that, first of all, my experience of small businesses was very much highlighted by Maree when she spoke about 90% of certainly the businesses in our region have fewer than 5 staff. And the key thing with that is that they're busy doing producing the products, or doing the services, providing the services that they are a specialist in. They didn't go into business because they were good at business. They went into business because they were good at the thing that the business does. And it's a difficult bridge to a gap to bridge over into that understanding that I guess a business mindset can provide. In relation to then data and its potential benefit for small businesses, I guess the issue is one of innovation. If you're providing sensors that tell people how many pedestrians are around the place, well, we kind of already knew it in a sense. We didn't know it as well. We certainly didn't know around the corner how many people were, but we knew that we could count people going past our shop with a clipboard. So the information, in a sense, isn't hidden, but by starting to actually look at it and think about it and innovate from it, as using it as a platform to innovate, is the key. And the ability to innovate then is your competitive advantage, rather than just the data that you're using to innovate, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
And Maree, do you want to add some comments and perspective from your side?
Yeah, sure. And look, that competitive advantage is all about what you apply with that knowledge and how you apply that knowledge. So, yeah, look, I think the timing might look on its face to be all crazy because businesses are in survival mode at the moment. They have had a really tough year. Let's be honest, it's not been fabulous trying to trade with if you're a customer, if you're a business that depends on foot traffic, you know, you sell, say, break bread or something like that. It's just been really, really hard to survive. So, whilst on the face of it, it might look that small businesses really don't have the capacity or the interest. It's actually the opposite. Now is the perfect time because so many businesses have realised the old way of doing things is no longer going to work, and they need to engage their customers differently. They need to twist into different, places. I was dealing with an eco lodge business the other day. The owner of that was telling me that they're moving into producing the furniture that they used to hand make and have in their eco lodge for their guests to enjoy. They're going to turn that into part of their business now. So people are looking for new things to do and new ways to engage with customers. But I see this as the perfect opportunity to inform that process and really open their eyes to a whole other way. Look at your food truck example. It's a prime example of just thinking differently to capture a whole extra serving of, of food in a day, in a 24-hour period.
Great. One more follow-up question, James, because you are on our panel as representing local government. In your view, in your experience, how does Moreton Bay look at the commercial potential, the commercial, I suppose, prospects of data, when you are at the kind of crossroad of saying, well, here's something interesting that I've come across. Either we could make it open, or we could actually partner with these and these stakeholders and turn this into a city service, and the city service is then available for a fee, and the fee might then contribute to sustaining the city infrastructure, or it could contribute to reducing rates or taxes, so it can have other benefits. But what are the kinds of I suppose guidances that inform that decision of whether something is then openly available, or whether the city would actually say, hang on a minute, we might, hang on to these particular data sets?
I think there's a couple of dimensions to keep in mind. For Moreton Bay Council, we've gone through a significant cultural change in the last 12 months. And to be honest, I really don't know what the thinking is amongst the councillors and the executive management on that particular issue. I'll give you my personal opinion though, and this is what I'll be advocating for. In relation to the provision of data, I see it as it's owned by the citizens. It shouldn't be, we shouldn't be making people to pay for it. I like the idea, and I think I got this from Maree back in the ODI days, that if we start to actually create a service that goes beyond a simple data portal, if we're creating a service that people rely upon, their businesses actually rely upon, then there's a likelihood that if that service just stops overnight, that's going to cause a problem for them. So there's probably some fee might be associated with that service to ensure its continuity, and those sorts of things. So there's some of the dimensions. Also, I think that there's probably a third dimension, which is around there are a number of data services already that we can procure, and by then making them available to the community, we would have to decide whether we need to be compensated for that or not, and that's a conversation that we're really yet to have. In terms of economic development, as a council, we've been fairly quiet until about 6 months ago, and so I'm sitting down with our new Chief Economic Development Officer really this year, just to start to look at really revitalising all of those kinds of things in the context of economic development.
Great, thank you. Monique and Zoe, one of the scenarios that we've envisaged or configurations of the data care facility is around data action. And one of the particular ways it could be used is actually to oppose a city development. So for instance, these days, a lot of large infrastructure projects, and Zoe, you'd be quite familiar with this from your days with transport and main roads. They require environmental impact assessments and then these statements to be produced. A lot of community engagement goes into those, but also a lot of data and a lot of data analytics. And it strikes me that a lot of this, the caliber of data analytics required for such large developments is only really available to big players, the city itself and the kinds of consultancies that they would engage and commission to produce such reports. What we have envisaged with data care is to try and balance this out a little bit by giving communities also some of this power of data analytics to say, hang on a minute, in terms of the new airport runway, in terms of the casino, in terms of the tunnel, whatever infrastructure project might be in the pipeline, here is an alternative. And it's actually then possible, for instance, to back this up with a much more sophisticated level of data analytics to provide alternatives. I'm interested, Monique, maybe to hear your experience of how Barcelona or other cities would balance this kind of conflict of interest of giving this power to communities, but it actually could backfire in the sense that they might oppose or use it against city deployments. And then Zoe, whether in any of the cities that you visited or in any of the interviews that you've conducted, has this problem come across? Have you come across it, and how was it dealt with? Monique, do you want to start on this?
So in terms of the Barcelona example, they use a platform that's called Decidem Barcelona. In English, it means We Decide Barcelona. So these sorts of opportunities, or it's put to the citizens in terms of, actually voting or having the say of not only the purposes for which data is collected and used, but also various other infrastructural or city developments that are informed by the use of that data. So you have direct citizen involvement. Certainly where I live at the moment, actually in Torquay on the surf coast of Victoria, there's a sort of a similar struggle going on in terms of further developments of wetlands here, Spring Creek. And so I would see sort of these types of applications in terms of the provision of data being useful for citizens kind of, or even on both sides actually, particularly just in terms of making informed decisions around any infrastructural developments or sustainability. I also just wanted to go back to the point that James raised around climate sensing in cities. I think that's really important, actually, the collection of that data. But I also want to caution around sort of this techno-solutionist approach. And I think this connects to other work that Marcus and I have been doing around the use of technology in terms of driving sustainabilities or efficiency gains from an environmental perspective. And so I just wanted to put some caution to that and think about, how can we address issues, environmental issues, not only through technology, but address them in the rollout of technology themselves. So such as issues of vendor lock-in, addressing failures of planned obsolescence of the sensors and so forth themselves. So thinking about actually smart cities as green cities from the very much the outset, being mindful of that. So I think that somewhat answers your question, off on a sustainability tangent, but I'll hand it over to Zoe now.
Yes, I think we're getting kicked out. But let's see, are we getting kicked out?
No, not yet. I just blend in naturally and try to pick up.
Okay, so
we have some wiggle room here and there. No worries. Yeah.
Can you remind me of your question again, please, Marcus?
Yeah, it's about whether there is, how to navigate the conflict of interest when a city would provide the kinds of data analytics capabilities that eventually the community uses to oppose a city proposal?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. I think we're going to see more and more of it, even just in the tools that are available for budding data analysts and citizen scientists. You know, I'm currently doing Masters of Data Science because I wanted to dive a bit deeper into this. And I mean, as much as, yeah, I think we need more people involved, but we need more informed people involved as well to make sure that we do have that balance there. But also, I think the decision-making board of, you know, why we're doing this project or what's happening with this project, what decision hold points, you know, what does that look like, is having more diversity on that board of decision makers as well. You've got the data analysts, you've got community representatives, you've got the, you know, why we're actually doing this. And I think it will also, I guess, really create rigor in decision makers of why is this development necessary. And there may be some perfectly good reasons. Sorry, my Siri is talking to me now. Some perfectly good reasons as to why this is necessary. I don't know what trigger word I used, but my Siri was talking in my ear. He's talking again. Go away, please. Okay, it's gone.
The technology taking over.
It's taking over, which is also very concerning. So, yeah, I think the transparency that, whether we like it or not, we're going to be forced into a more transparent world. There will be issues, definitely, if there's, I guess, ill information or fake news and all that type of stuff as well. We can kind of see we're moving down some of those paths already. But it's going to add a new level of rigor that will be required. And I think from an engineering sense, I think that's really important. But then making sure that, yeah, when we are looking at data, you know, we're looking at data in a holistic sense. There's lots of confirmation bias and you're picking the bits that suit you and all those type of things. So yeah, it's not going to be easy. And I don't think there's a silver bullet at the moment, but it does take a lot of people to be involved that have that knowledge behind them, but then all different backgrounds too, professional backgrounds and experiences, and why it's really, why are we actually doing this? What's the benefit? Who's benefiting, etc., etc. Yeah. So yeah, I think it will take a few projects to really get us used to this new way of you know, how we're working and what we're doing. But yeah, I am excited to be involved in those discussions too, because I think it's coming whether the people on this call like it or not. And it's already here for a lot of things, right? We can access anything we want, and it's going to happen more and more. So
great.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Zoe, and all our panelists, James, Monique, and Maree. It's 7 o'clock now here in Tasmania and 6 o'clock in Brisbane. So I think we have to wrap it up. I think Davor is asking us to wrap this up. It's been fantastic discussion. I probably could go on for another hour talking about and geeking out around all these data questions. I think what is really interesting is this trajectory where initially we started off with the quantity of data. It's then moved into the kind of the quality of insights that can be derived. And maybe what's at the horizon is actually to look at governance of how we not just have insights. I think we got plenty now, but actually how they translate into proper decision-making in politics, in governance, in policy making. With regards to Monique's comment, for instance, around climate change. I think we all know what we need to do, but it still doesn't translate into the political action often. So hopefully jointly we can work towards accelerating and expediting this trajectory. For those who are listening across the Open and Agile Smart Cities Network, if you're interested in any of these ideas and projects that we've been discussing, please do get in touch with us. The OASC Secretariat can provide our contact details, but we're also easily discoverable on Google. With that, I'll pass back to Davor, and thank you very much for tuning in.
Thank you, Marcus. Thank you all. Special thanks also to the speakers. It was a real fascinating session to listen to. I also studied in Perth for 4 years, so I know what the weather is like around this time. Quite jealous. It's pretty grey and cold here at HQ in Belgium. Thanks, guys. And ladies. So we are now moving on with the program. We have a session planned with the or about the Indian Urban Data Exchange, which is the initiative out of India that is looking to bank and progress international standards to connect all the smart city projects and infrastructures in the country. Very interesting topic, also quite timely. Thanks again to these speakers, and time for us to move to India. See you on the other side. Thanks.